Hello everyone and welcome back. I'm planning to upload a lot more compilations in the future, so I would like to know which compilation is your favorite. Let's Not Meet stories, Told in the Rain stories, or scary stories to fuel your nightmares. Let me know in the comment section below. Today, I have for you 7 scary stories, so grab your flashlight and follow me into the darkness. Number 1. I live in Castle Rock, Montana. As you probably know, nothing ever happens in Montana. My idea of Castle Rock was, well, mind-numbing. It was great living an ordinary life, always the same, never anything new. I could know what would happen next. I felt safe. It was 10th grade when everything changed. One stupid decision would change my whole life. Maybe it was fate. My best friend said. She was adventurous. You might even say a bad influence. Even her name screamed, "Don't mess with me." Beatrix. I call her B, for short. She helped me through this though, and I'll always love her for that. I think it was a Tuesday. B and I walked down to this bridge thing. Train tracks ran under it, and it had hills on either side of it. Because it was made of concrete, it was cold. When you leaned up against it, it would give you goosebumps. B and I went there a lot. This specific Tuesday, though, we shouldn't have been there. We should have stayed at school. What we saw when we walked down the hill was so gruesome and petrifying. My brother's best friend Jacob was laying there in pieces. He was run over by the train. His body was torn. I got dizzy. I think I almost blacked out. B wasn't much better. She was already throwing up. I should have known to turn back when she was just standing there. I should have turned around and run. This sight ruined my life. I got obsessed. When I looked closer at the body, I saw that there were things that happened to him that couldn't have been caused by that train. His head was completely off of his body, probably caused by the train, but his face... God, his face! His skin was ripped off his right cheek, like he had been skinned. His eyes were missing. He looked like he was tortured. I gazed at his feet. His shoes were missing. B said, "We should have known something like this happened. We should have looked for him." She was talking about Jacob being a missing person. Everyone thought to be with his girlfriend who lived in California. We were both in shock. "We should call the police," I said. B said she wasn't going to do it, and I didn't want to either. We played rock, paper, scissors. She won. After the police came, we gave them our statement, and we were sent back to school. Who can just go back to school after seeing that? I was so bewildered by what I had seen. I was also so intrigued. I needed to know what happened to Jacob. I talked to my science teacher about what I saw. He could not come up with any explanations of what could have happened to Jacob before he got hit by the train, other than someone did that to him. My teacher told me I should try to figure out what happened and that he would help. I told him B would help us too. At first, I didn't want to have anything to do with it, especially with my brother Mason around. I didn't want to make him upset. He doesn't even know what happened yet. No one really does. I feel like I was meant to do this, like it was my destiny or something. I know that's weird to say. Oh, I was destined to solve that murder. Like there's more than we know, and my job is to figure it out. When school ended, I went right to B's house. I told her about wanting to solve the case, and she said she felt the same way. After talking for a while, it was decided we should go back to the railroad to look for clues. On the way walking there, we were talking about how much Bea had changed since middle school. She was so much more outgoing, and honestly, I was jealous. I was so shy and quiet. "Then why don't you do something about it, Megan?" she finally said when I mentioned it. "What do you mean?" I said. She never called me by my full name, so I knew she was frustrated with me. "I mean, push yourself. Do something you wouldn't normally do. It's not as hard as you think. You should Bea was interrupted by an ambulance rushing by. "I wonder what that's all about," she said. "Yeah, me too," I replied. We got to the bridge about an hour before dark, so we didn't have much time to look around before we couldn't see anything. We ducked under the police tape and started looking. We had no clue what we were looking for, though. 7 minutes later, Bea called my name. "Meg, come look at this," and motioned me over. She held up a carving knife by the tip of the handle, just like they do with the guns they find in crime shows. It had a red plastic and metal handle that was gently rusted. The blade was covered in a thin coat of dry blood that made it look orange. I immediately yelled at her to put it down. "No," she said. "We need to bring it to the police," she said while putting it in a Ziploc she took out of the back pocket of her ripped blue jeans. "Where did you even find that?" I said. "It was crammed between these two rocks," she said, and pointed down while looking at me. I glanced over at them. They had been spray-painted over many times by the looks. "I think we should head to the police station," Bea explained. "We need to turn this in before they think we killed him or something." I agreed. "Yeah, let's leave this place. It's giving me a bad feeling." With that, we headed up the hill and walked down the road to the police station. A tip for everyone reading this: don't walk into a police station holding a knife, even if it's in a bag. Bea and I carefully explained what we were doing. "I wanted to help," Bea explained. "We can't have kids snooping around a crime scene like that." The police officer responded. "How could we solve this if the police are against us?" I started to lose hope. We started walk out, but someone approached us. He said he was friends with our science teacher, Mr. Henry. He worked at the police station and said he would keep us informed through Mr. Henry. It was dark by the time I got home. I had dinner and went to bed. I was sleeping when I awoke to the door to my house opening. I remembered Mason wasn't at the dinner table and knew it was him. I went back to bed. In the morning, Bea picked me up as usual, and we drove to school. We always made sure we got there early so we could have time to talk. We didn't have any classes together, so it was nice to still see each other at school. Today we went to Mr. Henry's class to discuss possible suspects. We made a list that started with Jacob's girlfriend. We could not think one that didn't like Jacob. He was an all-around good student. Without me seeing, Bea wrote down Mason. When I realized, I got defensive. "Bea, what the hell?" I yelled. "Listen, it's just they were really close and maybe something happened," she said, trying to get me to calm down. "She's right. You never know what goes in someone's head," Mr. Henry explained. "Whatever," I responded, not wanting to accept the possibility. Suddenly, all of the things in my subconscious clicked together and realized that all these little weird things my brother had been doing made sense now. Coming home late, the stealing, the lying, the lack of self-control, his baggy clothes, even his poor social skills. "Wait," I blurted out. "I think it was my brother." I started to cry. I told them what I knew and that it could have been him. Mr. Henry told me to not worry about, but also not to say anything to him. If I'd said something, he would get angry. I probably should not be suspecting my own brother of murder, but every alarm in my brain just went off. We had a short week at school because of the news stirring everyone up, and I stayed at B's house. I did not want to near my possible psychopathic brother. While at B's house, we discussed everything and why I thought my brother killed his best friend. On Sunday, I went home and talked to my dad. "Do you know if Mason had a carving knife?" I asked. "I got him a red one for his 11th birthday. Why, did you find it?" He responded. In my head, I was thinking how absolutely terrified I was to be back in my own house, but I simply responded with, "Yeah, it was in the garage," and walked away. I went up to my room and had a meltdown. How could I have been in the same house with him this long and not realize something was up with him? I called B. She convinced me we needed to tell someone. Next week at school, Mr. Henry told me they lifted fingerprints from the knife we found. "Now is your chance to tell them you think it's Mason," B said when I told her. I made an anonymous call to the police station. They came to my house later that day to talk to my brother. My parents were out that day, though. I really wish they were home. When my brother got back, he threatened me. He said he knew that I knew, that he saw B and I at the bridge the other day. He attacked me. We were struggling on the floor for what seemed like a really long time. I finally got up. I ran to the kitchen. I grabbed a knife from a sliding drawer and slammed it shut. Once I knew I had enough time to run, I ran through the back door and into my yard. He followed me outside. I held the knife in front of me. I screamed, "Don't touch me, Mason! Don't make me hurt you!" I was hoping someone would hear me, but my voice was so weak. "I know you could not do anything to me, Megan. I'm your brother," he replied. He tried to pick me up, and I stabbed him. I stabbed my own brother. When I was done, I got up, walked inside, and called 911. "Hello, this is 911. What is your emergency?" said the operator. "I just killed my brother," I replied in a monotone voice. "You killed him?" they say, confused. "Yes," I said. "Okay, we are sending an officer. Where do you live?" I responded. 224 Richmond Road. Trying to get a sense of what was happening, the operator said, "Can you please tell me what happened?" "I was in my house when my brother attacked me. I knew he killed Jacob. He was choking me, and I was scared, and stabbed him," I said before hanging up. I waited out front, covered in blood, for the police. When they came, I explained everything. They said I did the right thing. When my parents came back, we talked about everything. Years later, I am still friends with B. We thought it would be a good idea to share my story. So here I am, writing down this experience. I work as a police officer. B is a yoga instructor, which I'd say is pretty expected for her. I'm glad she pursued me to do this. It feels good writing everything down. I hope you understand how traumatic this whole thing was for me. And B, it changed who we are. We will never be the same as we were before. We were changed by this. It teaches us things we never would have realized were important before. For that, I am thankful. Number 2. 4 years ago, I was fresh out of college with my teaching degree. I picked up the first job I could find. Let me point out that this school was full of troubled teens and not exactly in the nicest area. I am a petite, 5-foot, 100-pound woman. I pretty much ignored everyone who told me that it wasn't safe. For the sake of my students, the school, and myself, I have changed all names in the story. My first day at Central High School wasn't as bad as people had told me. In fact, the children were very kind and willing to learn. They just never had the chance to apply themselves. However, there was one troubled child, Dylan. He was constantly lashing out during classes and disturbing the other students. At the time, I thought he was seeking attention or a mentor. I hadn't heard from his parents once since the semester began, and had called them on numerous occasions. I figured he was stuck with deadbeat parents. It all started when Dylan stayed late after class. "Can I ask you a question?" he asked. "Yes, the Pythagorean theorem will be on the exam," I said with a smile. "No, it's not that," he trailed off. "My parents can't pick me up today, and I already missed the bus. Could I have a ride?" In my mind I was thinking that if he hadn't sat after class for a good 10 minutes, putting away his textbooks, he wouldn't have missed the bus. Instead of scolding him, I reached for a 20 from my purse. "Take a cab," I said, handing him the cash. It's against policy for me to be with students outside of the school. I will never forget the look on his face. The look of pure hatred. He snatched the $20 from my hands and threw it onto the ground. Then he left without saying another word. I stood there in shock, picking up the money and scrambling to get my things together to leave as soon as possible. But first, I had to make sure that he was truly gone. I peeked out into the hallway and didn't see him. I quickly ran to my car with my purse, but suddenly someone grabbed me from behind. "Whoa! Testy much?" It was Matt, the high school English teacher. We'd started seeing each other a few weeks ago. "Sorry," I said, frazzled. "It is just that a student of mine caught me off guard." "Don't they all?" he said, laughing. He kissed me goodbye as I drove away fast. I didn't look back, and I thought about taking Tuesday off. "Suck it up, Cora," I mumbled. I decided to take a bubble bath to ease my mind. I put on a glass of champagne and tried to enjoy the night. Then my dog Pepper started barking profusely. I dropped my champagne glass and reached for my silk robe, grabbing a large shard left from the glass. Once I had my robe on, I held onto the glass and slowly crept to one of the windows. It was him, Dylan. He'd been standing outside my door with a black hoodie on. "What the fuck?" I whispered, crouching down. I called Matt and told him to come over quickly, but when I looked back out the window, he was gone. Matt came over anyway and checked my entire house. There was no sign of him. I asked Matt to stay the night. He humbly agreed. That morning, we got up at 7 a.m. and quickly chatted before heading to work. "You sure you're okay?" he asked. "Yeah, I'll talk to the principal today and see what's going on," I said, grabbing some toast. As I drove to school, I thought about how I was going to approach Dylan. I didn't want to cause a scene, so I decided to wait until everyone else was gone and class was over. As the one of the lost children started to leave, I motioned Dylan to my desk. "I know that you were at my house. What were you doing?" He could sense the terror in my voice. "I don't know what you're talking about, Miss Braun," he said, grabbing his backpack and starting to leave the door. "No, you were there. I know it. I saw you. I'm going to call your parents," I said, half yelling as he walked down the hallway. Strangely enough, he stopped at one of the benches and took off his backpack. He continued to walk about a mile or so before he disappeared into the distance. I walked cautiously to the bench and opened up the backpack. At first, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Then, as I continued digging through the binders, notebooks, and pockets, I was horrified. He had pictures of me eating dinner, exercising, showering, and even having sex. He'd been in my house before, and by the looks of it, he had been visiting me for a while. That's when I ran to the principal's office. "Principal Starvey, we have a very disturbed student," I said, showing him some of the more appropriate pictures that had been taken on me. He clasped his hands over his mouth in terror. "Who is this?" he asked, already reaching for his phone. "Dylan Rhodes." "Dylan Rhodes? Are you sure?" He paused. "We don't have a student by that name registered to Central High." I probably turned a new shade of white as he dialed 911. I told the officer my entire story and gave them the phone number that I had been leaving messages for his parents on. It was newly disconnected. The address was an abandoned home in the projects that looked as though it hadn't been lived in for over 20 years. I called Matt immediately to tell him what had happened, but he didn't pick up. I decided to stay the night at my mom's. That morning, I received a phone call from the secretary asking if I'd seen Matt because he didn't show up and his cell was going straight to voicemail. As the weeks went by, there was no trace of Matt or the eerie student. The officers, though, they had a lead, but the trail went cold. I still teach at Central High, but not a day goes by that I don't think about Dylan Rhodes or whoever he is. Does he ever plan on coming back? What was he doing there in the first place? I hoped that Matt was out there somewhere, alive and well, but deep down I had a feeling that if they ever found him, he'd be dead. These are the questions that keep me up at night, and I don't know if I'll ever be ready to know the truth. Number 3. Summer of 2004. My family was supposed to vacation in Kennebunkport, Maine. My father was stuck in meetings, so he was going to come up from Manhattan a few days after us. My mom wanted to drive up, super annoying to me at the time, but we didn't have a choice, and my brother, sister, and I loaded into the car and started the drive. I was about 14 at the time. Drive was uneventful, but there were various delays, and we ended up getting in a lot later than originally planned. Because of this, the owners of the house we were renting had turned in for the night, and we weren't able to get a hold of them to get the keys. Sounds like horrible planning, but apparently they were pretty strict about the time frame to pick up the keys. My mom decided she wanted lobster, so we went to one of our favorite spots. She called my dad to see if he would make us reservations at a hotel in Kennebunkport from New York City while we ate. We were enjoying the lobster while a guy came up and started chatting with my mom. I figured it was just a friendly local making conversation. During this, my dad calls my mom, and my mom excuses herself to speak to him. Apparently, all hotels were booked for the night. Go figure. Height of vacation season in Kennebunkport. The plan was for us to drive to the nearest town and just find somewhere to stay until we could pick up the keys for our vacation home. Apparently the local had been listening into my mom's conversation and came back over once she got off the phone. I want to say there was nothing outwardly off about him. He was preppy, clean-cut, unassuming, and fit in with the clientele. He told my mom he had a big home with a big guest house we were more than welcome to stay at, and his wife wouldn't mind. Immediately, My reaction was, fuck that. No way in the world I was staying in a random dude's house in creepy Maine in the dark. No offense to anyone from Maine, but the streets get creepy. My mom doing her due diligence. Determined this guy was legit. Said he was in finance. My mom was an investment banker, and they charted enough for my mom to determine he wasn't totally full of it. I called my dad hysterical. He said I was overreacting and that I needed to get out of the city more and accept that sometimes people are just nice. So, my brother, sister and I got into our car and followed him back to his house. The guest house was really nice, fully furnished, but the beds were oddly placed. The guest house had 2 bedrooms, and instead of the beds being located in the middle centered, imagine a symmetrical room layout, they were right under the window in each room. Just seemed out of place. Anyway, fast forward. We are all getting ready to go to bed. My mom hears a knock on the door, and it's the guy. He said he just wanted to check to make sure we got settled. Cool, nice thing to do. About 30 minutes later, he comes back to check in again. At this point, my mom was like, "Thanks, we're good. We will stop by the house in the morning to say thank you," etc. Fast forward another 30 to 45 minutes. I can't sleep. I'm terrified. We hear this rustling, which is odd because the guest house was nowhere around trees or close proximity to bushes that might cause such a noise. At this point, I see my mom wide awake and look up at the window, like motioning towards the window with her eyes. Let me add, none of the windows had curtains. The guy said it's because his wife was in the process of redecorating. When I looked up, there was a male figure just standing. I thought I was going to have a heart attack. I don't know how long he was there for. When he walked away, my mom waited a bit, and then he told us to get our stuff together. She wasn't messing around. We had my dad on the phone at this point. He was pretty much flipping out at my mom about something, but I didn't hear what. My mom said she was going to put stuff in the car and to follow her out. This was around 2 a.m. When we got into the car, we pulled around to the front of the main house, so my mom could return the key and say thanks and get the fuck out of there. However, when we got to the front, all of the lights were off. Not just all lights, but it looked like no one had been home. Porch light, table lamp in front windows, everything black. Also the 2 cars were gone, the local's car and what we presumed to be his wife's car. After seeing this, my mom at this point pretty unsettled, said we were leaving, and we proceeded to drive to the gate. The gate at the end of the driveway had been dead bolted, padlocked shut from the inside. It wasn't a super strong gate, so my dad said rev it. We were in a big SUV, and just get out of there. We drove straight back to New York City, not speaking the entire time. We have never returned back to Maine, and my parents refused to speak about it. I asked a family member one night about it when he was drunk, and all he said is, "They didn't tell you?" The actual owners of the house were on vacation. I'm assuming my mom or dad followed up with local authorities and figured that out, but never told us. I don't know who that man was or what was planned that evening. I was curious as to whether there were any known serial killers or murderers who were in the area at the time, whether traveling through. Number 4. This summer between senior year of high school and freshman year of college, I worked as a lifeguard at a scout summer camp. I would drive roughly 4 hours on Sunday morning to get down to the camp. Then, on Thursday afternoon, after that week's session had ended, I would drive the roughly 4 hours back home so I could relax and recharge in the air conditioning of my parents' house. Sure, it was a lot of miles on my poor shitty car, but I always loved being able to speed down those country highways, car top down and music blasting. I got pulled over once or twice, but I always managed to talk my way out of tickets and quickly learned where the cops would lurk and run radar. Early on in the summer, I was driving back home on a cloudy, relatively cool Thursday. It was mid-afternoon, about an hour into my journey, when I saw a painted sign on the side of the highway. Fruit stand 1 mile on right. I was in the middle of nowhere, endless acres of wheat bordered the highway, and I decided to stop, get some fruit to bring home to my mom, and see if there was a bathroom I could use. As the sign promised, 1 mile ahead on the right was the fruit stand. I pulled off the highway and my tires crunched over the gravel drive that led up to a classic-looking farmhouse. The fruit stand was a hand-built garage of the side of the house. I parked my car and called out a greeting. A sun-weathered overall, worn boots and straw hat wearing man greeted me from inside the shade of the fruit stand. As I browsed the selection of produce, which was mostly early berries, tomatoes, watermelons, and the like, I made conversation with the farmer. He introduced himself as Mike, and he and I ended up sitting and talking for the better part of an hour. He commented on my damn foreign car. I told him how I had built it myself and learned to drive stick in it, which he approved of. He gave me college advice and told me how he had gotten his degree through the military. At some point, his wife Elizabeth had came out and joined us, and she was as sun-weathered as he was. I drove away that day with my passenger seat full of fresh bread, fruits and veggies, and some fresh eggs in my cooler. I made it a point to stop at the fruit stand as I made my trips back and forth between camp. Our relationship grew to the point where I could just walk into their house, call a greeting, and we'd sit down and have drinks and snacks. They didn't have any children, so I think they were pretending I was their child or grandchild or something. The three of us were having dinner out on the porch one evening. The sun had begun to cast long purple shadows, and a cool breeze kept the flies away. From where I was sitting, I could see down their driveway and across the highway to the wheat fields on the other side. The sun had illuminated the stalks of wheat a beautiful golden, but that didn't change the fact that the seemingly endless wheat fields creeped me out to no end. As I stared across the empty highway, I saw something. A dark, hunched figure was slowly emerging from the wheat, and when I say slowly, I mean slowly. It took me a solid 2 minutes to even recognize the figure was moving and not stationary. We watched this figure until it was free of the wheat, then as fast as you can blink, it went from the edge of the field to the edge of the highway pavement, and it just stood there, watching us. Then it was across the far lanes of the highway, and was now at the center median. Inside. Now. Mike's voice startled me. We quickly abandoned our dinner, and when we shut and locked the door, the creature was at the foot of the driveway. The best way I can describe this creature is werewolf, drawn by Stephen Gamel of the Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark book series. Its feet were too large, hands too big, and fingers too long. It was probably 2 of my cars stacked on top of each other tall, and was incredibly buff. I say buff because from 50 feet away I could see that this thing's muscles were massive. 2 large ears sat on top of his head, and a narrow pointy face sat atop its wide shoulders. And then it was gone. But a moment later, it reappeared on the front porch, its awful face millimeters away from mine, pressed flat against the thin pane of glass separating us. Liz let out a terrified shriek. Mike dove for his shotgun, and me? I'd like to say I did something brave, like shot it or lured it away from my adoptive grandparents, but I didn't. I couldn't make my body move. We just stood there, staring into each other's eyes. I saw things, horrible things I don't have the words to describe. Death, fires, destruction. I was a frightened rabbit in the jaws of the wolf. I blacked out. I came to when the back of my head cracked against the hardwood floor, or maybe when Mike's shotgun was fired through the door's mail slot, or maybe when the creature let out an ear-bleedingly loud scream, or some combination of the 3. The creature staggered off of the front porch and disappeared around the side of the house. All night long, we sat huddled in the living room as the creature circled the house, screaming, scratching the walls, the glass, with its terrible claws. At times, it sounded as if there were more than one. The screaming and scratching came from all around the house, from upstairs, the basement, in our heads. For the first time since I decided I was an atheist at age 9, I prayed. I didn't do much, obviously, but I gave it a good try. At some point, during the night, my car alarm started going off, and I was more worried about my car than I was myself or the farmers. What can I say? I loved that car, and I still have it all these years later, in all of its shitty glory. Then, just as the sun was starting to rise, everything calmed down. The farm was awash in beautiful warm light as Mike and I crept outside, armed with a rifle and a shoved-off shotgun. The siding of the house was beat up, deep gouges had been carved into the ground, and the top of my car was shredded. Produce was scattered all over the ground, but the creature was nowhere to be seen. Number 5. So this is a story for which I was very young. It was a few years after I was born, so I don't remember a whole lot, only bits and pieces. I'd say that I was 5 or 6 years old. My parents filled in the gaps for me, so I'm going to tell the whole version of the story, both my parts and theirs. We were living in an old farmhouse at the time. My parents were poor, so they rented from a landlord that owned a few small properties in the area. My dad worked in the steel mill on the midnight shift, so he worked some odd hours. This is relevant because it might be the only reason that we are still alive and that I am able to write this story today. "Help! Help! He's going to rape me! Help me!" We jolted out of bed, in and were fully awake in an instant. I was sleeping in bed with my parents at the time, because I had been having awful night terrors. My dad, who had just been switched off from the midnight shift days, jumped out of bed and cautiously made his way down the stairs, grabbing a stocking pick from the fireplace in the living room. He got to the door when he heard it again. "Help! Oh my God, he's coming!" The woman's voice on the other side of the door began sobbing hysterically. "We have to help her. Open the door," said my mother. Mom is an inherently good woman who always goes out of her way to help people every single day in her life. She reached for the deadbolt, but my dad stopped her. He shot her a look and said cautiously through the door, "What's going on? Who's after you, and where is he?" The voice through the door responded, I just need to get in before he gets here. Please, please. More sobs. My father turned on the porch light and said, "Stay up on the porch with your back against the door." He then opened the deadbolt, but not the chain lock. He slipped a brick that we used as a doorstop through the crack. "Take this and use it to defend yourself if you need it. I'll be right on the other side of the door, and if he comes after you, I'll come out and help. In the meantime, I'm calling the police. They'll be here soon." This is when the woman started to absolutely lose her mind. She began slamming her whole body into the door with a mindless fury. "What the fuck is wrong with you? Let me in this goddamn house right now." "What kind of fucking people are you?" My dad forced the door shut and clicked the deadbolt home again. He immediately called the police and they came within 10 minutes. When they arrived, the woman was simply gone. The doorstop brick was sitting on one of the porch steps. My parents gave a description of the events and the woman as best they could. We tried our best to get to sleep in the following nights, but Mom and Dad checked all of the locks and windows several times throughout the night. I don't remember understanding what happened, but I remember thinking that my parents were acting strange and wondering why they didn't help this woman. I thought that the man snuck up and got her while we were calling the police. A few days later, we found out that the police had been called for a similar situation. My dad's brother-in-law worked in law enforcement and told us that this time the police had happened to have a car down the street and arrived without lights and sirens. The officers saw the woman that my parents had described at the front door, on top of the porch. When they began walking, a man dashed out of the bushes from the side of the porch. They chased him down pretty quickly and recovered a long kitchen knife from the bushes where he had been hiding. The man and the woman had been working together to try to gain entry to houses. The police surmised that the woman would get people to open the door and let her in, and then let her partner in. God only knows what he would have done once he got inside. Once I heard this story and put it together with my memories of the event, it sent chills down my spine. Imagine what would have happened if my dad had been working the midnight shift or if we had been asleep. He grew up in a very bad neighborhood, so he was always overly cautious about people around him. Usually, it was mildly irritating, but this time it may have saved our lives. Number 6. I recently got a new phone. My old one was like 3 years old, and it was suffering. It's amazing how fast technology goes bad these days. Plus, it wasn't all that top of the line to begin with. I mean, I always want the new cutting-edge stuff, but I want to not spend $1,000 too. That's not even an exaggeration for some of the new stuff anymore. Anyway, so I got a new phone. It's still not cutting edge, but it was only a couple of $100, so I'll take the trade-off. And it's got a ton of new features, all new to me anyway. So I've spent the last couple of weeks just screwing around with it and trying out all of the new stuff my other phone didn't have. The camera in particular had a bunch of improvements. It's got a macro lens, all that stuff. And I know most of you have had all of that for years, but shut up, I'm excited about it. It's also got facial recognition built in, so when you take pictures of people, it automatically recognizes them as people and focuses on their faces, which is pretty awesome, because I'm not like some camera person who knows apertures and f-stops and whatever. I like point and shoot. I don't get why the pictures I take don't always look like what I was looking at. Like, I get different lighting and all that, but I was looking at it in the same light that my camera was, so why doesn't it look the same? I know that's not really a rhetorical question, and that there's probably some really good answer about exposure time or something, but I don't care. I just want it to work. All that is to say that facial recognition and things like that are awesome. They make the pictures closer to what I am looking at without any extra work on my part, which is basically all I want out of a camera. At least, they do when they work. And when they don't work, they're still pretty funny a lot of the time. That's what I thought was going on with my camera app at first. The first time I noticed it was the day after I got the new phone. I was out at the bar with friends, and I got everyone to scrunch together for a group photo. I centered the picture, and the little facial recognition rectangles popped up, one over its friend's face, and an extra one off to the side. I took the picture anyway, and it came out great, even in the low light of the bar. So I didn't worry about it much, or even really think about it again, until a couple of days later, when I was taking pictures of my friend Tammy. We were out at the park, and she was looking cute, so I declared myself her photographer, and we did a photo shoot. I took a couple of dozen photos in several different locations, and every time the facial recognition rectangle would pop up around her face and also in one other spot in the field. Sometimes over her left shoulder, sometimes her right, but always nearby. It was just like there was another person in the photos who we just couldn't see. I started paying attention then, and I realized that the rectangle was showing up in every photo I took. Even ones with no people at all. Facial recognition always centered in one spot, insisting someone was there. I thought that it was just some autofocus feature to improve the composition of the photos, but it was definitely claiming that there was a face. What's more, if I moved the camera around to adjust the shot, the rectangle would stay focused on the same part of the picture. I tried turning with the camera, moving the shot far enough so that the rectangle would be out of frame. The first time I tried that, it worked. The rectangle painted left and disappeared. A second later, though, it popped back into existence on the screen, then slowly tracked light off its own accord before stopping, just like someone had just walked into the shot. That creeped me out enough to stop messing with it for a while. A few days later, though, I was out at karaoke night with my friends, and we were all having a good time. I wanted to get a shot of all of us, so I opened the camera app and got everybody in for a group selfie. I saw the extra rectangle pop up, but I ignored it. It wasn't messing up with the photos anyway, so why did I really care? I snapped the shot, then pulled up the photo to look at it. It had come out blurry, so I figured that my hand hadn't been all that steady, and I tried again. When I held the phone out for a second attempt, though, what I saw on the screen startled me so much that I yelped and dropped the phone. The facial recognition rectangles had popped up around the faces of me and my friends, but they were blinking in and out as the system tried to decide between focusing on those and focusing on one big rectangle that took up most of the frame. There was still nothing there, nothing visible but us, but the app was trying its hardest to focus on someone standing between me and the phone in my outstretched arm. I haven't taken any more pictures, obviously, but lately I've started to feel occasional tickles on my neck, like strands of long hair brushing against my skin. Sometimes I hear breathing when there's no one around but me, and last night, sitting alone on my couch, I felt a hand with long nails scrape the back of my neck. No one was there when I leaped to my feet. No one I could see, anyway. But I think the camera might tell a different story. Number 7. I am usually a lurker on Reddit, but I don't know what to believe anymore. I've always been one for logic and reason, but in the back of my mind, buried deep in my subconscious, I believe in the supernatural. I'd never admit this to any real people, and honestly, this is probably the first time I've admitted it to myself, and tell you all that I believe. I still jump onto my bed, sleep with the closet closed and night light on, and quickly run to the safety of light when I have to turn the whole light off. I try to brush it off and act casual, but my heart is pounding every time. Today, I experienced something that just confirmed all my feelings are at the very least somewhat valid. A little background first. I've always lived in apartments with my 2 cats, Ernie and Bailey. Had been trying for a while to get us into a house for many reasons. Mostly I wanted to give them more space to run around. About 3 months ago, this amazing house went on the market for dirt cheap. 3 bed, 2 bath, spacious backyard, appliances included. Flag number 1, right? Well, it was just what I'd been looking for, and well beneath my limit, so I jumped on it. The first few nights were amazing. The cats were running around and meowing at everything and seemed much happier. Not long after that though, Arnie started to change. He would do that thing that cats do where they stare into the corner or just at nothing. Neither him nor Bailey ever really did that. What's even weirder is he started hishing me too. He'll just stare, then hiss, then go back to playing. My Ernie never hisses. The first time it happened, or some neighborhood cat trying to start some beef with my babies. I figured maybe he was just spooked by the new house, or was homesick for the apartment, as that's the only place he's ever lived. I scheduled an appointment for the vet, just to be safe. A week went by, where he'd do the stare-hiss thing, maybe every other day. Took him to the vet, and she said he was just fine, though he waited a little less. That was 2 months ago. I've tried giving him more food, his favorite treats, and comforting him. He was still hissing, never at me though, so I was thankful for that. Anyways, today, I was watching TV when Ernie hopped up on the coffee table and did the stare-hiss thing. This time though, I looked in his eyes. His pupils are always dilated when he's staring, but today, it was like they were a mirror. They were so big. I saw some kind of shadowy figure faintly outlined in my cat's eye. How crazy does that sound? I couldn't help myself though. I immediately got chills and gasped, and I'm not trying to blame myself for this, but when I gasped, Ernie was thrown across the room and hit the wall. He ran into the cat room, and I sure as shit followed. He was limping and licking his leg, so I gently put him in his carrier and took Bailey, and we're currently at the emergency vet. I don't want to sleep in my house tonight, but I have nowhere else to go. Hey there, and thank you so much for listening. Don't forget to comment and like this video, and also comment your favorite compilation so I will make more in the future. Take care, and I will see you all in my next video.